you mentioned fertility expectations. That's been a big source of controversy in looking at what fertility projections, to use and going into the future. I mean, yes, you mentioned Social Security Administration is assuming that fertility rates are going to recover from their current level of about 1.65, and they're going to go back up to 2.0, whereas the Census Bureau and the Congressional Budget Office are, in the neighborhood of 1.8. And, traditionally SSA has used fertility expectations as sort of the basis for their optimism. They would point to these surveys, and these surveys go back several decades. They ask women, how many children have you had, and how many more children would you like to have? And traditionally, those numbers have been, greater than 2. And so, if expectations don't change, you can assume that women will ultimately have the 2 kids that they expect to have. But, it turns out that, as you follow these surveys over time, the most recent surveys, I think from 2019, actually are showing among women, particularly younger women, in their early 20s and up even to their early 30s, they are having fewer children, and the number that they want to have doesn't appear to be making up for the fewer that they've already had. And so you're getting numbers that are actually barely equal to 2. And when you look at the fact that many women don't actually have the number that they want to have, they tend to have fewer, that tends to suggest that given declining births, declining expectations, and generally the shortfall between expectation and realization, you're looking at fertility rates closer to the 1.8 level. And so, it's just interesting that, these surveys, they're not that, hopefully, the surveys will turn out, expectations will be fulfilled. But if you look at, as Tori mentioned earlier, women are getting married later and having kids later, and at some point it just becomes too late to have the second and third child. So
demographers have a saying: fertility delayed is fertility denied. If you delay childbirth into your early 30s or mid 30s, you're likely to have fewer children than you once expected to have. So fertility delayed is fertility denied. And it's also worth noting, I think you're suggesting, Steve, that the gap between ideal and actual realized has sort of been narrowing over time in the US. This has happened in other developed countries as well. And in fact, the gap in many has disappeared. Over time, if you're in a society with a low fertility rate for a generation or two, sort of the social norm for ideal family size changes. The ideal gets smaller. And so over time, the ideal and the expectations converge with the actual at a low level. All I was suggesting is there still seems to be some sort of a window, maybe, to the extent you have a gap between actual and expected, for policies to make a difference, right? Policies that help young people, and especially women, balance work and family responsibilities. But my own view is that expecting a rebound to 2.0, as SSA does, as the Social Security Administration does, based on the expectational data, is, well, let's just say that it's wishful thinking.